Rivers crisis. I was offered a N5BN bribe to impeach Fubara. Edison Ahi. The political tension brewing in Rivers State has taken a more dramatic turn with Edison Ahi, a former factional speaker of the Rivers State House of Assembly and now Chief of Staff to Governor Siminalayi Fubara, alleging that he was offered a staggering N5 billion bribe to orchestrate the governor's impeachment. This shocking revelation has not only fueled public outcry, but has also illuminated the deepening rift between Governor Fubara and his predecessor, Nyesom Wike, now serving as the Minister of the Federal Capital Territory. The backdrop of this controversy is a state already caught in the grip of political unrest, where a declared state of emergency looms large and accusations of institutional corruption threaten to derail democratic processes. Governor Fubara's decision to avoid legal confrontations and pursue mediation has sparked a debate about effective governance in crisis situations and the balance between legal recourse and conflict resolution through dialogue. The implications of the alleged N5 billion bribe are far-reaching, highlighting a troubling norm in Nigerian politics where monetary inducement is used to subvert democratic processes. Such actions threaten the integrity of the state's political framework, weakening the very institutions meant to uphold transparency and public accountability. The notion that elected officials could be influenced by vast sums of money casts a long shadow over the sanctity of democratic mandates. In this context, the governor's resolve to present evidence of the bribery attempt is a bold step toward restoring public trust. By choosing transparency over secrecy, Fubara is sending a strong message that his administration is committed to ethical governance, a message that could resonate positively with the public and civil society organizations calling for cleaner politics in Nigeria. Governor Fubara's emphasis on peaceful dialogue and mediation rather than legal action is a strategic decision that aligns with global best practices in conflict resolution. Mediation allows parties to resolve disputes without the polarization and delays often associated with legal battles. In the case of Rivers State, this approach is particularly prudent given the volatility of the political climate. Engaging all stakeholders in open discussion can diffuse tensions, promote reconciliation, and potentially prevent further escalation of the crisis. However, for mediation to be effective, it must be inclusive, transparent, and facilitated by neutral parties. If properly managed, this method could set a precedent for conflict resolution in other politically charged states in Nigeria, where courtrooms are often overburdened and trust in judicial independence remains low. At the core of this crisis is a struggle for financial control and political loyalty, with former Governor Wike reportedly dissatisfied over issues related to resource allocation and influence. The N5 billion in question raises questions about its intended use, whether as legitimate state funding or as leverage in a broader political power play. The discussion also exposed technical shortcomings in political communication, with interruptions and unclear messaging undermining the integrity of public dialogue. These lapses emphasize the need for institutional reform and more reliable communication infrastructure in governance. Ultimately, the resolution of the Rivers crisis will depend not only on how well Fubara can manage internal dissent, but also on how effectively he can uphold principles of accountability and transparency in the face of immense political pressure. By doing so, he may not only stabilize his administration, but also carve a new path for ethical leadership in Nigeria's often tumultuous political landscape. State of emergency and its implications for Rivers State. The looming threat of a state of emergency in Rivers State carries serious implications for democratic governance, civil liberties, and public service delivery. Typically declared when there is a perceived breakdown of law and order, a state of emergency grants extraordinary powers to the federal government, often at the expense of elected local leadership. In the context of the Rivers crisis, such a declaration would not only undermine Governor Fubara's authority, but could also disrupt key government functions, delay developmental projects, and exacerbate public anxiety. More critically, it risks being used as a political tool to suppress opposition or resolve power struggles through federal intervention rather than democratic means. While the Nigerian constitution allows for states of emergency in dire situations, the decision must be carefully weighed against its long-term consequences for state autonomy and institutional integrity. Politically, a state of emergency would be viewed by many as a vote of no confidence in the current administration, further polarizing already tense political relationships. Governor Fubara's preference for peaceful dialogue over legal warfare becomes even more significant in this context. His attempt to avoid confrontation can be interpreted as a bid to protect the state's democratic structure from external manipulation. However, this choice also makes him vulnerable to political actors who might see negotiation as a sign of weakness rather than strength. The federal government's posture will be crucial if it takes sides or imposes emergency measures without broad consultation. It risks eroding the legitimacy of democratic institutions and deepening public mistrust in governance. Conversely, if it supports mediation efforts and refrains from coercive actions, it may help stabilize the situation and reinforce respect for constitutional processes. One of the critical lessons from this crisis is the central role that financial transparency plays in political stability. The allegations surrounding a N5 billion bribe are not just about the act of corruption itself, but about a broader failure in public financial management and accountability. When political actors treat state resources as personal entitlements or bargaining chips, it undermines development and alienates the citizenry. To counter this, the Rivers state government must prioritize public audits, open budgeting processes, and the publication of financial records. These measures would not only restore public confidence, but also limit the space for behind-the-scenes deals that fuel political infighting. In addition, strengthening internal checks and balances within the State House of Assembly and executive offices would help institutionalize accountability and reduce dependency on the goodwill of individual office holders. Moving forward, the crisis in Rivers State should serve as a catalyst for wider reforms in Nigeria's political and governance culture. First, the legislature at both state and federal levels should revisit laws related to political bribery, expanding definitions and enhancing penalties to deter future infractions. Second, political parties need to enforce internal discipline and ethical codes to discourage members from engaging in destabilizing behavior. Finally, civil society must continue to play an active role in monitoring government actions, pushing for transparency, and advocating for peaceful resolution of conflicts. The situation in Rivers is not isolated, it reflects systemic issues across the country. But with the right mix of leadership, institutional reform, and civic engagement, it could become a turning point toward more accountable and resilient governance in Nigeria. Bribery and political stability. Unpacking the damage bribery in the political sphere, particularly at the scale alleged in Rivers State, poses a grave threat to democratic governance and political stability. The claim by Edison Ehi that N5 billion was offered to him to impeach Governor Fubara is not just an accusation of corruption, it is an indictment of how political influence is bought and sold, potentially undermining the very foundations of representative government. When financial inducements dictate political loyalty, public interest is sidelined, and institutions become tools in the hands of a few powerful actors. This breeds a culture of impunity where unethical behavior goes unpunished, weakening public trust in political systems and discouraging civic participation. For a democracy like Nigeria's, which is still grappling with institutional fragility, the normalization of such practices threatens to plunge regions like Rivers State into repeated cycles of conflict and governance paralysis. The destabilizing effects of bribery are far-reaching. It creates factions within government structures, as seen in the divided State House of Assembly, and encourages disloyalty among political appointees who may prioritize personal enrichment over constitutional obligations. In the case of Rivers State, this has led to administrative gridlock, where focus shifts from development to internal battles for control. Moreover, it disrupts continuity in governance, as policy goals are often abandoned midway due to political realignments triggered by these financial manipulations. This scenario is especially harmful in states that rely on long-term infrastructural and economic planning. Without consistent leadership and trust in the political process, foreign investment shrinks, local businesses suffer, and ordinary citizens bear the brunt of instability through job losses, inflation, and poor public services. To mitigate the corrosive impact of political bribery, a multifaceted approach is required. Legal frameworks addressing corruption must be strengthened and actively enforced. Nigeria already has anti-corruption bodies like the EFCC, Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, and ICPC, Independent Corrupt Practices Commission, but their interventions are often seen as selective or politically motivated. For these institutions to function effectively, they must be given autonomy, secure funding, and legal protection against political interference. In addition, whistleblower protections need to be enhanced so that individuals like Edison Ehi can come forward without fear of retaliation. Political parties also have a role to play by enforcing strict codes of conduct and internal discipline mechanisms. They can weed out members who resort to underhanded tactics to gain influence or disrupt governance. Public awareness and civic education are equally important tools in the fight against political bribery. Citizens must be empowered to demand transparency from their leaders and hold them accountable through public forums, town hall meetings, and civil society coalitions. Social media and traditional news platforms can amplify these efforts by shedding light on shady deals and corrupt practices, thereby creating pressure for reform. In Rivers State, this moment offers an opportunity for citizens and civil groups to rally behind calls for clean governance and institutional reform. By turning outrage into action, the people can help steer the state away from recurring crises and toward a more accountable, transparent, and people-centered political culture. Only then can Rivers and Nigeria at large truly begin to tackle the systemic corruption that threatens its democratic future. Conclusion: navigating the Rivers crisis toward ethical governance and lasting stability. The unfolding political crisis in Rivers State, punctuated by the alleged N5 billion bribery scandal, represents far more than a local power tussle. It serves as a microcosm of the broader challenges facing Nigeria's democratic institutions. At its core lies a critical question of governance. Will politics in Nigeria continue to be driven by self-interest and patronage, or can leaders and citizens collectively steer the nation toward integrity, accountability, and stability? Governor Fubara's choice to prioritize mediation over litigation reflects a commendable strategy rooted in dialogue and de-escalation, even as it exposes him to heightened political risk. Meanwhile, the explosive claims made by Edison Ehi not only underscore the scale of corruption at play, but also raise red flags about the susceptibility of political actors to financial inducement and manipulation. The threat of a state of emergency highlights the precariousness of the situation and the need for a balanced approach that prioritizes institutional autonomy while maintaining law and order. Emergency rule, while legal, must be treated as a last resort, not a political tool, and should only be deployed with transparent justifications and in full collaboration with all stakeholders. Financial transparency, open governance, and stable political structures are not optional luxuries in this context. They are essential to prevent further decay. The Rivers crisis has revealed how unchecked financial dealings and political rivalries can compromise development, stall democratic progress, and alienate citizens from the very leaders elected to serve them. As such, reforms that institutionalize accountability through public audits, inclusive budgeting, and civic engagement are no longer negotiable. Furthermore, the allegations of bribery shine a light on how corruption can erode political cohesion and disrupt state functioning. This underscores the urgency for strengthened anti-corruption enforcement, nonpartisan investigation mechanisms, and a judiciary insulated from political interference. It also emphasizes the role of ethical leadership in resisting undue influence, especially when personal ambition or external pressure could otherwise compromise public service. For political actors across the country, the Rivers incident must serve as a warning that short-term gains achieved through corruption inevitably destabilize the broader system. Only by cultivating integrity at all levels, from the executive to the legislature, can Nigeria move beyond the vicious cycle of political betrayal and regain the trust of its people. In conclusion, the Rivers State crisis must be seen as both a cautionary tale and a call to action. It reveals the urgent need for systemic reforms in Nigeria's political architecture, but it also offers a roadmap for recovery if stakeholders are willing to act with courage and integrity. Mediation, transparency, and institutional reform must take center stage if Rivers is to emerge from this crisis stronger and more unified. This is a pivotal moment, not just for Rivers State, but for the entire nation to decide whether democracy will be deepened through ethical leadership or derailed by corruption and conflict. The choices made now will echo far beyond the current headlines, shaping Nigeria's democratic legacy for generations to come.